Okay, so rapid opioid detox. It's one of those things, right? Like, who hasn't heard about it and thought, wow, that sounds kind of too good to be true?
Yeah, you're really hitting on something there. It's understandable that allure of a faster, easier fix, especially with something as complex and challenging as opioid dependence.
And then you throw in the Waismann method specifically.
With their long track record and all those powerful testimonials.
Exactly. It's like, well, maybe there's a miracle cure out there after all. But we're all about digging deeper here, going beyond the marketing and really understanding what's what. So for anyone who's ever wondered, what is the Waismann method really? Today's deep dive is for you.
I'm glad we're having this conversation because it's essential to approach these things with a critical eye, especially when it comes to something as serious as addiction.
Absolutely. So let's get down to brass tacks. What exactly is the Waismann method, and how is it different from traditional detox?
So first and foremost, it's important to understand that the Waismann method is a medical procedure. It's not some magic pill, right?
Right.
It's designed to make the detox process more manageable, not necessarily effortless. They achieve this through a combination of things. Sedation to help manage those intense withdrawal symptoms.
Okay.
Medication to block opioid receptors in the brain.
Which is how they can reduce those cravings so drastically.
Exactly. And then there's this whole other piece they call neurological support.
Ooh, that's where it gets really intriguing.
It does sound kind of futuristic, basically while they don't reveal all the specifics.
Which, fair enough, that's common in the medical world.
Right. But from what their materials suggest, this neurological support seems to involve a combination of targeted medications and therapies. And the goal here is to essentially minimize the neurological distress of withdrawal. Think of it like giving your nervous system extra support while it goes through this massive reset.
So, like a buffer against the shock of coming off opioids. Because we always hear about how opioids impact the brain, often in long-lasting ways.
Exactly. And that's what makes this neurological support component so fascinating. They're claiming that it not only eases the immediate discomfort, but potentially even promotes faster and more complete nervous system recovery.
Now, that's a pretty bold claim. And speaking of bold claims, their website doesn't shy away from them. We see phrases like complete detoxification, craving elimination, nervous system recovery. It's powerful stuff, especially for someone who's desperate for a solution. How realistic are these claims, really?
Okay, yeah, that's where we really need to break things down.
Right.
Because while their method is definitely medically sound, those claims warrant a closer look, let's say.
I like that. Warrant a closer look.
Yeah, so let's start with complete detoxification. What they're doing with the Waismann method is essentially cleansing the body of opioids.
So, like hitting the reset button.
Exactly. But here's the thing. It doesn't actually erase the underlying dependence. Think of it like this. You can reset your phone to factory settings, right? But that doesn't delete the fact that you downloaded those addictive apps in the first place. The potential to re-download them, that's still there.
So it's addressing the immediate physical dependency,
Yes.
but not necessarily rewiring those long-term, deeper behavioral patterns that contribute to addiction.
That's exactly it. It's like removing a splinter, you know? You take out that immediate irritant, but the skin still needs time to heal fully.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about craving elimination? I feel like that one's especially tricky because we know cravings aren't just physical. There's a huge mental and emotional component to addiction, too.
Huge. And that's where things get even more nuanced, right? Because blocking opioid receptors, which the Waismann method does, that can significantly reduce the physical cravings.
And those are often the most intense, most difficult to manage, especially in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it doesn't eliminate those psychological cravings.
The thoughts, the memories, the situations.
All those emotional triggers, right, that could lead to relapse.
Okay, so it's like you might not physically crave the drug in the same way, but your brain still remembers it, still has those addictive pathways etched in.
You got it. And that's why, comprehensive addiction treatment always includes therapy, support systems.
To address that whole other layer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nervous system recovery is another big one. We know opioids can really do a number on your nervous system.
They do?
And while the Waismann method might be able to kickstart the healing process, full recovery, it's more complicated than that.
It's not like you just walk out of the hospital with a brand new nervous system.
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
As much as we wish that were the case, it's more of a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
It takes time, consistent effort to rebuild those healthy habits, manage stress, address any underlying mental health conditions. It's a whole journey.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation because it's easy to get swept up in the marketing, but you're really helping us see past the hype and understand the nuances here.
I appreciate that. That's what I'm here for.
So we've established that the Waismann method, while promising, isn't exactly a magic bullet. But what sets it apart from other detox programs? What makes their approach unique?
Okay, that's the question. Three things really stand out to me. The level of customization, the fact that the procedure happens in a hospital setting, and what appears to be a very thought-out post-detox support system.
Customization, a hospital setting, and serious post-detox support. It's not your typical approach to addiction treatment. And that's saying something because, let's be real, one size fits all rarely cuts it in this realm.
You're so right. It's actually refreshing to see that emphasis on individualization, because addiction isn't a monolith.
Not at all.
Everyone's story is different. The types of opioids used, how long someone's been dependent, their overall health, even their mental state at the time, it all factors in.
It's like someone who's been on fentanyl patches for years is going to have very different needs than someone with a more recent dependence on, say, prescription painkillers.
Exactly. And ignoring those individual factors, trying to squeeze everyone into the same box,
It's a recipe for disaster, right?
it can be ineffective at best, potentially risky at worst. The Waismann method seems to get that. They stress a thorough medical evaluation up front, like really understanding each patient's history, and needs to create that tailored detox plan.
Which makes sense, right? Because you're not just managing symptoms, you're setting the stage for long-term recovery.
Precisely. It's like you wouldn't expect to feel your best or perform your best in a suit that's just completely wrong for your body, right?
Yahweh.
Addiction treatment is kind of similar. That custom approach, it just makes a world of difference.
It's the difference between trying to squeeze into something off the rack and getting something tailored specifically for you.
100%. And speaking of feeling safe and secure, let's talk about that hospital setting, because it's interesting, right?
It definitely challenges that image we usually have of addiction treatment.
Right. Thanks to movies and TV, we picture sprawling rehab centers with group therapy sessions and whatnot.
Exactly.
And while residential rehab definitely has its place, detox that initial phase, it's often the most physically demanding.
It can be rough.
And having that medical safety net, knowing that trained professionals and emergency resources are right there if, or should I say when, complications arise, that's huge.
It is, especially for someone with other health conditions. Maybe they've been using opioids heavily for a long time. That extra layer of medical care could be critical.
Sure.
But what I find particularly interesting, what really sets them apart, is that they don't just stop at detox. They've really woven in this whole post-detox support system.
And that's key, because detox is just the beginning, right? It's step one. But the real work, the unpacking of those deep-rooted reasons for addiction, the building of coping mechanisms, the creation of a life worth staying sober for, that all comes afterward.
It's like they're saying, we'll get you through the storm, but we're also going to help you navigate your way back to shore and build a life that you don't need to escape from.
That's a great way to put it. It's about that transition, that often overlooked space between detox and going back to real life. And their on-site recovery retreat, from what they describe, this serene healing environment it seems to provide, that essential transition period.
That buffer, that time and space to heal, to process, to really dig deep, away from all those familiar triggers and stressors.
Exactly, and to start building that solid foundation for long-term recovery.
And then on top of that, they have those Vivitrol injections they talk about. How does that fit into their whole post-detox approach?
Right, so Vivitrol, it's a medication that essentially blocks the effects of opioids, making them ineffective.
Okay, so it's not that Vivitrol eliminates cravings, but if someone were to use opioids while on it, they wouldn't get that same high.
Exactly. It's all about disrupting that reward cycle, which we know is a huge part of addiction.
It takes away that instant gratification that keeps people coming back.
Exactly. And of course, they also mention ongoing therapy, which is essential.
It all comes back to that holistic approach, right?
Yes, addressing the psychological and emotional roots of addiction, because that's how you create lasting change.
Developing those healthier coping mechanisms, learning how to manage stress effectively, building that support network, it's all connected.
It is.
It seems like they've really thought this through, this whole delicate transition period. But I'm going to guess that all of this comes at a price.
You are correct. They're very upfront about their pricing, which is good.
Transparency is always a good sign.
It is. And while the exact cost varies depending on the program length, they seem to have gone with an all-inclusive approach. So that means the hospital stay, the recovery retreat, even transportation, from what I gather, is all factored in up front.
Okay, so it's all inclusive, which makes sense, especially with how piecemeal addiction treatment can be. But let's be real, we're talking about a serious investment here, right?
Yeah, there's no getting around that.
Their website, it mentions figures upwards of $20,000, which is a lot of money for most people.
It's a hefty price tag, no doubt about it. But I think to really wrap your head around it, it helps to consider what the cost of not seeking treatment might look like. Because relapse is a reality for a lot of people, and those costs, medical bills, legal fees, lost productivity, the strain on relationships,
It adds up so quickly.
it can spiral out of control, really, and often those costs end up exceeding even the priciest treatment programs.
It's like, think of it like investing in a really good roof, right?
I like that.
Yeah, it's a big upfront cost for sure.
Sure.
But it's nothing compared to the damage and the expense of constant leaks and repairs down the line.
100%. And we haven't even touched on the intangible costs, which are much harder to put a number on.
Right, the emotional toll, the impact on relationships.
The missed opportunities, the damage to your self-esteem, those are real and lasting consequences.
Absolutely, and that's a good point. The true cost of addiction, it's so much bigger than just dollars and cents. But I think for someone who's maybe weighing their options, how does the Waismann Method's cost compare to, say, a more traditional long-term rehab program?
It's a good question because on the surface you see that the Waismann Method is a shorter program.
Right.
But you have to remember, it's not just detox they're offering. They're integrating that crucial post-detox support, which a lot of times is a separate cost,
Right.
into one comprehensive package. So when you factor that in, the overall expense, it becomes more comparable to months of traditional rehab.
It's almost like they've streamlined the traditional model, potentially made it more accessible, at least logistically. But still, no matter how you slice it, for a lot of people, that price tag, it's going to be a barrier.
And that's the unfortunate reality. I think the cost of the Waismann Method really highlights a huge issue with addiction treatment in general accessibility.
It's a huge problem.
We desperately need more affordable options.
Yeah.
We need to see insurance companies expanding coverage for these kinds of programs.
Because cost should not be a barrier to getting help.
It absolutely should not.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I have to ask about those patient testimonials because, wow, are they powerful.
They are something else.
Like those stories of transformation, of people reclaiming their lives. Talk about an emotional punch.
Yeah, and I think those stories are so important because they offer this window into the lived experiences of other people who've walked a similar path. And that human connection, that feeling of I'm not alone, it can be incredibly validating and empowering, especially when you're at the beginning of your recovery journey.
It's like this beacon of hope, this reminder that even when things feel impossibly dark, recovery is possible.
It is.
Oh.
But, and I think this is important, it's crucial to approach testimonials with a balanced perspective.
Of course.
Because individual experiences, they vary so wildly.
They really do. What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. And keep in mind, those testimonials, they're often selected by the company itself.
It's their marketing, after all.
Right. So, of course, they're going to highlight the success stories.
It's like reading online reviews. They can be helpful, but you kind of have to read between the lines, consider the source.
100%.
So, as we kind of bring our deep dive on the Waismann Method to a close here, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think it comes down to this. It seems like a legitimate medical option for opioid detox, for sure.
It's not a scam.
Definitely not. And they seem to be doing some really innovative things, especially with that emphasis on customization, on that hospital setting for safety, and of course that really comprehensive post-detox support. But, and I can't stress this enough, it's not a magic bullet.
Right, it's not a quick fix.
Long-term success, it still comes down to individual commitment, having that ongoing support, and really being willing to dig deep and address those root causes of addiction.
It all circles back to that holistic approach, recognizing that addiction is incredibly complex and it requires a multifaceted solution.
Exactly. And that journey, it's going to look different for everyone.
And that's a really important point. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I feel like we've really peeled back the layers and gotten a much clearer picture of what the Waismann Method is all about.
I agree.
But as with all things, we want to leave you with something to think about. The website mentions that insurance typically doesn't cover the Waismann Method, which brings up some really big questions.
It does.
What does that mean for people who simply can't afford this kind of treatment? what alternatives are out there.
And how effective are those alternatives, right?
Exactly, because everyone deserves a chance at recovery.
100%. Access to quality addiction treatment shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, that's our show for today. As always, we hope this deep dive has given you a lot to think about, and we encourage you to keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious.